will be my Luna." The words thundered through the small cabin like a storm, heavy with absolute authority and something deeper. Something that made Arya's heart race with panic and recognition. She retreated until her back pressed against the cold wall, her blue eyes wide and fixed on the man who had invaded her sanctuary. Her refuge, the only place where she had felt safe in 7 long years. The Alpha King filled the space like a contained tempest. Wild red hair covered in snow, thick beard framing a face carved in hard angles, and those amber eyes that burned with an intensity that made her want to look away, yet unable to do so. He had found what he was searching for. He had found her. "No," whispered the desperate voice in her mind. "Not after everything I did to escape. Not after all this time. I do not want this," she managed to say, forcing steadiness into her trembling voice. "I do not want to be claimed. I do not want to be your Luna. I built a life here, away from all of that." He took a step forward, and she felt the shift in the air, felt his power wrap around her like a wave. "Caspian," he said, his rough voice softening just slightly. "My name is Caspian, and you, Arya, have been running for far too long. 7 years searching for you. 7 winters crossing every territory, every mountain, every forgotten corner of this realm. And now I stand before you, and you tell me you do not want this." His eyes burned into hers, seeing through every defense she had built over the years of hiding. "But what if I tell you I did not come here to cage you? What if I tell you I came here to set you free?" And in that moment, between fear and fury, between flight and fate, Arya realized her life was about to change forever. Before we continue with the story, tell us where you're watching from and how old you are. I hope you enjoy the story. The wind howled through the endless white, a symphony of isolation that had become her only companion. Snow fell in thick curtains, blurring the line between earth and sky, between existence and erasure. In the heart of this frozen wasteland stood a cabin, small and unassuming, its wooden walls weathered by countless winters. Inside, a fire crackled softly, casting amber shadows that danced across the face of a woman who had made invisibility her greatest skill. Her name was Arya, though she had not spoken it aloud in years. Black hair cascaded over her shoulders like midnight spilled across snow, and eyes the color of a winter sky gazed into the flames with a mixture of sorrow and defiance. She was an Omega, the rarest and most coveted designation among her kind, and she had spent the better part of a decade running from a fate she refused to accept. The world beyond her sanctuary was governed by ancient laws, by instincts that ran deeper than choice, deeper than free will. Alphas claimed Omegas as if they were treasures to be possessed, bonds to be forged regardless of consent. And among all Alphas, there was one whose search had become legend, a pursuit that had lasted years without end. The Alpha King. They said he was tireless in his hunt, that his crimson hair blazed like fire against the snow of the northern territories, that his strength was unmatched, his will unbreakable. They said he had searched every corner of the realm, leaving no stone unturned, no village unexplored. They said he would never stop until he found his destined mate, the Omega, who would stand beside him as Luna, as queen. Arya had heard the stories. She had fled from them, from him, from the inevitability that everyone else seemed to accept with such ease. She did not want to be found. She did not want to be claimed. She wanted only this: silence, solitude, the freedom to exist on her own terms, even if those terms meant loneliness that cut deeper than any winter cold. Outside, the storm intensified. The wind screamed against the cabin walls, and snow piled higher against the windows. Arya pulled her worn blanket tighter around her shoulders, staring into the fire as if it held answers she had not yet found. The flames whispered secrets in their crackling voice, and for a moment, just a fleeting moment, She wondered what it would be like to stop running, to be seen, to be known. But that moment passed. It always did. She rose from her chair, moving to the small kitchen area where dried herbs hung from the ceiling and provisions lined rough-hewn shelves. Her life here was simple, stripped to its essentials. She hunted when weather allowed, preserved what she could, and endured when the storms came. It was not comfort. It was not happiness. But it was hers, and that was enough. Or so she told herself. The fire suddenly flickered, disturbed by a draft that should not exist. Arya's senses sharpened instantly, her Omega instincts rising to the surface despite years of suppression. Something was different. Something was wrong. The air itself seemed to change, becoming heavier, charged with a presence that made her pulse quicken and her breathing shallow. Then came the knock. 3 measured strikes against the wooden door, each one reverberating through the small space like thunder. Arya froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. No one came to this place. No one knew it existed. She had chosen these mountains, this isolation, precisely because they were beyond the reach of civilization, beyond the reach of those who would seek her. The knock came again, more insistent this time. She moved toward the door as if drawn by invisible threads, every instinct screaming at her to run, to hide, to do anything but open that barrier between her sanctuary and whatever waited on the other side. Yet her hand reached for the latch, trembling fingers closing around cold metal. The door swung inward, and the storm rushed in with a roar. Snow swirled into the cabin, bringing with it a cold so intense it stole her breath. But it was not the cold that made her step backward, not the wind that made her eyes widen in recognition and fear. It was him. The Alpha King stood in her doorway like a figure from myth made flesh. He was massive, broad-shouldered and towering, his presence filling the space in a way that had nothing to do with physical size, and everything to do with power barely contained. His hair was the color of autumn fire, red and gold and copper, wild from the storm and dusted with snow. A thick beard framed a face that was all sharp angles and hard lines, except for his eyes. His eyes were the color of molten amber, and they burned with an intensity that made her want to look away, and unable to do so all at once. Those eyes found her, held her, saw through every defense she had constructed over the years of hiding. When he spoke, his voice was rough like stones grinding together, yet there was something beneath it, something that resonated in places she had tried to lock away. I have found you. 4 words, simple, absolute. They fell into the space between them with the weight of destiny, of inevitability, of every fear she had carried through endless lonely nights. Arya's voice came out barely above a whisper. You should not have come here. He stepped inside without invitation, and she found she could not stop him. His presence seemed to fill the cabin, making it feel suddenly small, suddenly insufficient. He closed the door behind him, shutting out the storm, and the silence that followed was somehow louder than the wind had been. I have searched for you for 7 years, he said, brushing snow from his heavy cloak. 7 winters, 7 summers. Through every territory, every village, every remote corner of this realm. And now I stand before you, and you tell me I should not have come. His gaze never left her face, studying her with an attention that felt like being seen for the first time in her life. Truly seen. Completely seen. It was terrifying. It was intoxicating. It was everything she had run from. I do not want this, Arya said, forcing strength into her voice that she did not feel. I do not want to be claimed. I do not want to be your Luna. I have built a life here, away from all of that. The Alpha King moved closer, and she retreated until her back pressed against the wall. He stopped just beyond arm's reach, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, could smell pine and snow and something indefinably masculine that made her Omega instincts rise like a tide she could not control. This, he repeated, gesturing to the small cabin. This isolation, this loneliness, you call this a life? It is my choice, she said, lifting her chin in defiance, even as her body betrayed her with its response to his proximity. I choose to be alone rather than to be possessed. Something flickered across his face, an emotion too complex to name. He reached up slowly, giving her time to move away if she chose, and touched a strand of her black hair where it fell across her shoulder. The contact sent electricity through her entire body, awakening sensations she had spent years trying to forget existed. Possessed, he murmured, his voice dropping lower. Is that what you think I want? To possess you like some object, some prize to be won and displayed? Is it not? Arya challenged, even as her breath caught in her throat. You are the Alpha King. You need a Luna, a queen to solidify your power, to bear your heirs. I am an Omega, rare and valuable. This is about duty, about biology, about everything except choice. He held her gaze, and in those amber depths she saw something she had not expected. Pain. Loneliness that mirrored her own. A hunger not for possession but for connection. For completion. For the one piece of himself he had been missing his entire life. You are right, he said quietly. And you are wrong. Yes, I am the Alpha King. Yes, I need a Luna. But you, Arya, you are not valuable to me because you are an Omega. You are everything to me because you are mine, as I am yours. This bond between us, it is not something I chose any more than you did. But it is real. It is there. And I have traveled through 7 years of searching because I would rather spend my life looking for you than settle for anyone else. The sound of her name on his lips shattered something inside her. She had not heard it in so long, had not been known by anyone for so long, that the intimacy of it broke through her defenses like water through a cracked dam. How do you know my name? She whispered. I know everything about you, he replied. I know you fled on the night of your 18th winter, when your designation manifested and your pack tried to auction you to the highest bidder. I know you have been alone since then, moving from place to place, always one step ahead of those who would claim you. I know you are strong, resilient, capable of surviving in conditions that would break lesser wolves. And I know you are tired, Arya, so very tired of running. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. What is your name? She asked, realizing with sudden shock that she had thought of him only as the Alpha King, as a title rather than a person. A small smile touched his lips, softening the hard lines of his face. Caspian, he said. My name is Caspian. Caspian, she repeated, tasting the name, feeling how it fit in her mouth like it had always belonged there. Why did you search for so long? You could have chosen another. Any Omega would have accepted you gladly. He shook his head slowly. No, there is only you. I felt you the moment you manifested. Felt the bond snap into place across hundreds of miles. I have lived with half my soul missing for 7 years, and I would live with it for 700 more if that was what it took to find you. But now, I have found you, and I will not leave without you. The finality in his voice should have frightened her, but instead it sparked anger, the fury of a creature backed into a corner with nowhere left to run. You cannot just take me, she said, her voice rising. I am not property. I am not a possession to be collected. I have fought too hard, sacrificed too much to surrender my freedom now. Then do not surrender it, Caspian said simply. Keep it. Bring it with you. Be free in my kingdom, at my side. I am not asking you to become less than you are. I am asking you to become more, to become everything you were always meant to be. As your Luna, as your queen, as the mother of your heirs. The words tasted bitter. Playing a role, fulfilling a function. As my mate, he corrected, his voice carrying a weight that made the air itself seem to thicken. As my equal. As the one who stands beside me not because she must, but because she chooses to. I cannot force the bond, Arya. I can only offer you what I am, what I have, and hope that it is enough. She laughed, a sharp sound without humor. And if I refuse? If I ask you to leave and never return? What then, Alpha King? His expression turned grave. Then I will leave. I will return to my kingdom alone. I will rule without a Luna, live without a mate, exist without the one piece of myself that makes me whole. And I will do it knowing that somewhere in these mountains, you are here, safe and free, living the life you chose. That will have to be enough. Arya searched his face for deception, for any sign that he was merely telling her what she wanted to hear. But she found only truth, raw and painful, and utterly sincere. It was more terrifying than any threat could have been, because it made him real, made him human, made him something other than the monster she had built in her imagination. I do not know how to do this, she admitted, her voice breaking. I do not know how to trust. I do not know how to let someone in. I have been alone for so long that I have forgotten what it means to be anything else. Caspian's hand rose again, this time cupping her face with a gentleness that contradicted his powerful presence. His palm was warm against her cold skin, and she found herself leaning into the touch despite every instinct that screamed at her to pull away. Then let me teach you, he said softly. Let me show you that not all bonds are chains, that not all connections are cages. Come with me, not as a prisoner, but as a partner. If you find that my kingdom is not a place you can call home, if you discover that I am not someone you can stand beside, then I will bring you back here myself. You have my word, given in the old way, bound by honor and blood. It was an oath no Alpha could break, especially not the Alpha King. The old ways were sacred, their bonds unbreakable. He was offering her an escape, a way out, even as he asked her to step into the very situation she had spent years avoiding. Outside, the storm continued its assault, but inside the cabin, everything had become still. Arya stood at a crossroads she had always known would come, had always dreaded, and now found less frightening than she had imagined. Perhaps it was exhaustion. Perhaps it was the bone-deep loneliness she had carried for so long. Or perhaps it was the way this man, this Alpha King named Caspian, looked at her not as a prize but as a person, not as a function but as a woman. If I come with you, she said slowly, carefully, things will be different. I will not be a decoration. I will not be silent. I will not pretend to be something I am not. I would expect nothing less, Caspian replied, a hint of amusement warming his amber eyes. A Luna who challenges me will make me a better king. A mate who speaks her mind will keep me honest. I do not want a doll, Arya. I want you, in all your fierce, stubborn, beautiful complexity. She closed her eyes, taking a breath that felt like the first one after drowning, like surfacing from dark water into light. When she opened them again, she had made her decision, for better or worse, for fear or hope. Then I will come with you, she said, not as your possession, not as your Luna, not yet, but as Arya, who is willing to see if what you offer is real, if this bond between us is something other than a prison. The smile that broke across Caspian's face transformed him completely. The hard warrior king became something softer, younger, almost vulnerable in his relief and joy. He pulled her into his arms before she could think to protest, holding her against his chest as if she were something precious and fragile and infinitely valuable. She stiffened at first, unused to touch, to closeness, to the warmth of another body against her own, but slowly, gradually, she allowed herself to relax into his embrace, to feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, to breathe in his scent and find it comforting rather than threatening. Thank you, he murmured into her hair. "Thank you for trusting me enough to try." They stood like that for a long moment, two halves of a whole beginning the slow process of becoming one, while the storm raged outside and the fire burned low inside. When they finally separated, Caspian looked around the cabin with practical assessment. "We cannot travel in this weather," he said. "The storm will last through the night. In the morning, when it clears, we will leave for the kingdom." Arya nodded, feeling both relief and anxiety at the reprieve. "You can sleep by the fire," she said, gesturing to the small space. "I have extra blankets." "And you?" he asked, one eyebrow rising. "I will sleep in my bed, as I always do." He inclined his head in acceptance, not pushing, not demanding more than she was ready to give. It was such a small thing, this respect for her boundaries, but it meant more than he could know. It was the first brick in a bridge she was beginning to believe might actually hold her weight. The night passed slowly. Arya lay in her small bed, acutely aware of Caspian's presence in the next room, of the way his breathing eventually settled into the deep rhythm of sleep. She did not sleep herself, at least not at first. Instead, she stared at the ceiling, her mind racing through everything that had happened, everything that would happen, the life she was leaving behind, and the unknown future spreading before her like uncharted territory. But eventually, exhaustion claimed her, and when she slept, she dreamed of red hair and amber eyes, of a kingdom carved from stone and hope, of a life that might be something other than loneliness. Morning came with startling brightness. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed by snow, everything clean and white and new. Arya woke to find Caspian already awake, rekindling the fire, his movements efficient and practiced. He had removed his heavy cloak, and she could see the powerful lines of his body, the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt, the casual strength he carried like a second skin. He turned when he heard her stir, and that smile appeared again, warm and genuine. "Good morning," he said. "I hope you do not mind, but I used some of your provisions to make breakfast." The domesticity of the moment struck her as absurd. The Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in the realm, making breakfast in her tiny cabin as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Despite herself, she felt a smile tugging at her own lips. "I suppose if you are taking me from my home, the least you can do is feed me first," she said, moving to join him by the small table. They ate in companionable silence, a simple meal of bread and preserved meat, but it felt significant somehow, like a ritual, like the first of many shared experiences. When they finished, Arya gathered her few belongings, the necessities of her isolated life, and bundled them in a worn pack. Caspian watched her, then spoke quietly. "If there is anything here that matters to you, anything you want to bring, take it. This place, these years, they are part of who you are. Do not leave them behind unless you choose to." She paused, looking around the cabin that had been her sanctuary, her prison, her protection. There was not much she wanted to keep, but there was a small carved wooden bird that she had made during her first winter here, a symbol of freedom she could not have but could at least hold in her hands. She tucked it carefully into her pack. "I am ready," she said, though she was not sure if that was true. They stepped out into the brilliant morning, and Arya gasped at the sight that awaited her. The kingdom's royal guard stood in formation around the cabin, at least 20 wolves in their shifted forms, massive and powerful, their breath steaming in the cold air. And beyond them, pulled by 4 magnificent draft horses, was a sleigh carved from dark wood and inlaid with silver, its interior lined with furs and cushions. "I did not come alone," Caspian explained, amusement in his voice at her shocked expression. "I am a king, after all. I have responsibilities, protocols. Besides, I was not sure how I would find you, what condition you might be in. I came prepared for any possibility." Including that I might refuse you? Arya asked, climbing into the sleigh with his assistants. Especially that, he confirmed, settling beside her and signaling to the driver. Hope is not the same as certainty, and I have learned not to take anything for granted. The journey down from the mountains took 3 days. 3 days of traveling through snow-covered landscapes, of stopping at night in tents that the guard set up with military precision, of conversations that slowly, gradually, began to peel back the layers of protection both Arya and Caspian had built around themselves. She learned that he had become king at 18, after his father fell in battle defending the northern border. She learned that he had ruled alone for 12 years, refusing all attempts by his council to arrange a political marriage, insisting that he would wait for his true mate no matter how long it took. She learned that he loved poetry, of all things, that he played the violin though he claimed to be terrible at it, that he had a younger sister who was probably going to tackle Arya the moment they arrived at the castle. He learned that she had a talent for languages, having picked them up from the various territories she had passed through. He learned that she was terrified of large crowds, that the few times she had been forced into cities during her flight had left her panicked and overwhelmed. He learned that she loved the stars, that she had spent countless nights mapping constellations from her cabin's single window, finding comfort in their distant, unchanging presence. They did not touch beyond the necessary, did not push beyond the boundaries of new acquaintance. But something was building between them, a foundation of understanding that grew stronger with each shared story, each moment of vulnerability. On the 3rd day, they crested a final hill, and Arya saw the kingdom spread before her like something from a dream. The castle rose from a stone outcropping, all towers and battlements, flags snapping in the wind. Below it, a city sprawled in organized chaos, smoke rising from countless chimneys, the sound of life and activity carrying even from this distance. "Welcome home," Caspian said softly, watching her face. "Welcome to Silvercrest." Home. The word felt foreign, impossible. But as they descended toward the castle, as people began to emerge into the streets to watch their king's return, as cheers rose up around them, Arya felt something shift inside her. Not acceptance. Not yet. But perhaps the beginning of possibility. The castle interior was overwhelming. High ceilings soared overhead, tapestries covered stone walls. Fireplaces large enough to stand in blazed with welcoming heat. Servants bowed as they passed, and Arya felt their eyes on her, curious, assessing, wondering who this strange woman was that their king had brought home from the wilderness. True to Caspian's warning, a young woman with the same red hair and amber eyes came flying down a grand staircase the moment they entered the main hall. She crashed into Caspian with enough force to make him grunt, then immediately turned her attention to Arya with an enthusiasm that was both endearing and terrifying. "You found her. You actually found her. I told him you were real, that the bond was real, but he was starting to doubt himself, even though he would never admit it. I am Lyra, his sister, and you must be exhausted and overwhelmed. So I am going to show you to your rooms and make sure you have everything you need, and try not to bombard you with 1,000 questions even though I absolutely want to." She delivered this entire speech without pausing for breath, grabbing Arya's hand and already pulling her toward the staircase. Arya looked back at Caspian with something close to panic, and he just shrugged helplessly, clearly having no control over his sister's exuberance. The rooms Lyra brought her to were nothing like the cabin. They were spacious and luxurious, with a massive bed covered in soft linens, windows that overlooked snow-capped mountains in the distance, a sitting area with comfortable chairs arranged around yet another fireplace. A door led to a bathing chamber with a tub large enough to swim in, and another opened into a dressing room already stocked with clothes in her size. "How did you know?" Arya asked, fingering the fabric of a deep blue dress. Lyra grinned. "Caspian is very thorough. When he decides to do something, he does it properly. He had these rooms prepared years ago just in case, always hoping. The clothes were a guess based on his description of you, which was extremely detailed and somewhat poetic, just so you know." Despite her anxiety, Arya found herself smiling at the younger woman's infectious energy. "You love your brother very much." "I do," Lyra confirmed, her expression turning serious. "And I know this must be terrifying for you. I know you do not know us, do not know if you can trust us, but I want you to know that Caspian is a good man, a good king, and he would never hurt you. He has been half alive for 7 years, and now that he has found you, there is light in his eyes again. So thank you for being brave enough to come here, to give this a chance." Arya felt tears sting her eyes for the second time since Caspian had appeared at her door. "I do not know if I can be what he needs," she admitted. "I do not know how to be a Luna, how to be a queen." "Then do not be," Lyra said simply. "Be yourself. Be Arya. That is all he wants, all he has ever wanted. The rest will follow, or it will not, but at least it will be real." After Lyra left, Arya stood in the center of her new rooms, feeling unmoored and uncertain. She moved to the window, looking out over the kingdom that was now somehow hers. This place full of people who would look to her for guidance, for strength, for all the things she was not sure she possessed. A knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Lyra. But it was Caspian who entered, his large frame filling the doorway. He had changed from his travel clothes into formal attire, looking every inch the king he was. Yet there was hesitation in his eyes, uncertainty in the way he paused just inside the room. "I wanted to make sure you had everything you need," he said, "and to tell you that there is no rush, no expectations. You can take all the time you require to adjust, to decide if this is truly what you want." Arya turned from the window to face him fully. "Your council will expect you to claim me. To formalize the bond, your people will expect a Luna. My council can wait. My people can manage their expectations. You are what matters, Arya. Your comfort, your choice, your readiness. I did not search for 7 years only to ruin everything by rushing you now." She studied him, this powerful man who somehow kept surprising her with his gentleness, his patience, his willingness to prioritize her needs over his own, or his kingdom's. It was so contrary to everything she had believed about alphas, about bonds, about the way this world worked. "I would like to learn," she said slowly, "about your kingdom, about your people, about what it means to be a Luna before I decide if I can actually be one. Is that acceptable?" Caspian's smile was brilliant. "More than acceptable. I will teach you everything, show you everything. And if at the end of it you decide this is not the life you want, then I will honor my oath and return you to your mountains, no matter how much it costs me." Over the following weeks, he kept that promise. He showed her the kingdom from the highest tower to the lowest dungeon. He introduced her to his council, his generals, his advisors, watching as she held her own in discussions of policy and strategy, her intelligence and insight surprising those who had expected a timid Omega. The first council meeting had been particularly memorable. The old wolves, set in their traditional ways, had barely concealed their skepticism when Caspian insisted Arya attend. One counselor, a grizzled alpha named Theron, had made the mistake of suggesting she wait outside while they discussed border security. Arya had stood slowly, her blue eyes turning ice cold. "I have survived 7 years alone in territories you would not last 7 days in," she had said, her voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. "I have crossed borders you do not even know exist, evaded trackers who are likely more skilled than your scouts, and navigated political landscapes where one wrong word meant death. Do not mistake my designation for weakness, counselor. I am here because your king values my perspective. Question that again, and you will find I am not as diplomatic as he is." The silence that followed had been deafening. Then Caspian had smiled, that fierce pride radiating through the bond between them, and said simply, "My mate has spoken. Does anyone else wish to suggest she leave?" No one did. And from that moment, Arya's place in the council chamber was never questioned again. He took her to the city, staying close as she navigated the crowds that frightened her, providing a steady presence that helped her feel safe. The first trip had been overwhelming, the press of bodies and voices making her panic rise like a tide. She had frozen in the market square, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow, the world tilting around her. Caspian had immediately recognized her distress. Without a word, he had pulled her against his chest, one hand cradling the back of her head, creating a shelter with his body. "Breathe with me," he had murmured into her ear. "In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. Feel my heartbeat. Match it. You are safe. I have you." She had focused on the steady rhythm of his heart, the solid warmth of him, the scent of pine and snow that was becoming as familiar as her own. Slowly, the panic had receded, replaced by calm, by trust, by the knowledge that she did not have to face these fears alone anymore. Afterward, he had taken her to a quieter part of the city, a garden tucked away behind old stone walls. They had sat together on a bench surrounded by winter roses, and he had told her about his own fears, about the nightmares he still had of his father's death, about the crushing weight of responsibility he carried every day. "Being a king means everyone sees your strength," he had said. "But no one sees your doubt, your exhaustion, your moments of fear. Except now. I show them to you, Arya, because I want you to know that I am not perfect, not infallible. I am just a man trying his best, and sometimes failing, and always hoping it is enough." She had taken his hand then, interlacing their fingers. "It is enough," she had told him. "You are enough." He showed her the orphanage that the crown supported, and Arya spent hours with the children, her natural warmth emerging as she told them stories and played simple games. There was one child in particular, a small girl named Mira, with haunted eyes and scars on her arms from an abusive pack she had been rescued from. The girl would not speak, would not engage, would barely eat. But Arya saw herself in Mira, saw the fear, the trauma, the determination to survive even when surviving hurt. She sat with the child every day for 2 weeks, not pushing, not demanding, just being present. She told stories of her own time alone, of the cabin in the mountains, of learning to trust again. On the 14th day, as Arya was preparing to leave, Mira's small hand had reached out and grabbed hers. "Will you come back?" the child had whispered, her first words in months. Arya had knelt down, eye level with the girl. "Every day," she had promised. "For as long as you need me." And she had kept that promise. Even after becoming Luna, even with all her responsibilities, she made time for Mira and the other children, becoming a mother figure to those who had none. Eventually, she and Caspian would formally adopt Mira, making her a princess of the realm, proof that family was about choice and love rather than blood alone. He took her to the training grounds where young wolves learned to fight, and she surprised everyone by asking to learn as well, refusing to be defenseless even in the relative safety of the castle. The weapons master, a scarred female alpha named Kira, had been skeptical at first but quickly became one of Arya's most ardent supporters. Training was brutal. Arya's body, used to survival rather than combat, had to be rebuilt from the foundation up. Every muscle ached. Every morning brought new bruises. But she pushed through, driven by a determination that impressed even the most hardened warriors. Caspian often watched from the sidelines, and Arya could feel his concern through the bond, his desire to intervene warring with his respect for her autonomy. She appreciated that he never tried to stop her, never suggested she was being foolish, even when she came to dinner barely able to lift her fork. The breakthrough came 6 weeks into her training. Kira had been demonstrating a defensive maneuver when one of the younger, more arrogant male trainees had scoffed. "An Omega learning to fight is like teaching a rabbit to hunt," he had said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Pointless and against nature." Arya had set down her practice blade and walked over to him. "Spar with me," she had said simply. The courtyard had gone silent. The young male, realizing his mistake too late, had no choice but to accept without looking like a coward. They had taken positions, and Kira had called the start. He had expected it to be quick. It was, just not in the way he anticipated. Arya used everything he underestimated against him: her smaller size, her agility, her willingness to fight dirty. She dodged his powerful strikes, used his momentum against him, and within 2 minutes had him on his back with her blade at his throat. "Nature," she had said, breathing hard, "is about adaptation and survival. I have survived things you cannot imagine. Do not mistake my designation for weakness again." From that day forward, no one at the training grounds ever questioned her right to be there. And when she eventually became Luna, the kingdom's warriors knew they had a queen who understood the price of strength, who had earned her place through effort rather than entitlement. Every night, they dined together, sometimes joined by Lyra, sometimes alone. Their conversations ranged from the trivial to the profound, building intimacy through words and shared experiences. One evening, about a month after her arrival, they had lingered over wine long after the meal was finished. The conversation had turned to dreams, to the futures they had imagined for themselves before fate had intervened. "I thought I would die alone," Arya had admitted, staring into her glass. "In that cabin or somewhere like it, I thought loneliness was the price of freedom, and I was willing to pay it. I never imagined this. You. Any of it." "I thought I would search forever," Caspian had replied. "That I would grow old alone, become bitter, perhaps eventually give up and accept a political marriage without love. I never let myself truly believe I would find you. Hope is dangerous when disappointment is possible." "Are you disappointed?" she had asked, looking up at him with vulnerability in her blue eyes. "I am not what you probably imagined. I am difficult, stubborn, damaged in ways I am still discovering." He had reached across the table, taking her hand. "You are everything I imagined, and nothing like I expected. You are stronger than I dreamed, braver than I hoped, more real than any fantasy. You are not perfect, Arya. Neither am I. But together, we are exactly what we need to be." She had smiled then, a real smile that lit up her entire face, and Caspian had felt, through the bond, the exact moment her heart acknowledged what her mind was still afraid to fully accept. She was falling in love with him. Another night, they had argued. Their first real disagreement had been about a policy regarding lone wolves, those without packs who wandered the territories. The council wanted stricter regulations, believing such wolves were dangerous and unpredictable. Caspian, trying to balance tradition with progress, had been inclined to compromise. But Arya had been furious. "I was a lone wolf," she had said, her voice rising. "For 7 years, I survived without a pack, without support, without anyone. And yes, I was running, but many lone wolves are simply individuals who do not fit the traditional structure. Punishing them for being different is cruel and short-sighted." "I understand that," Caspian had argued back, "but I also have to consider security, have to balance individual freedom with collective safety. It is not as simple as you make it sound." "Nothing worth doing is simple," she had shot back. "Being king means making hard choices, but it also means standing up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. If you will not do it, then what is the point of your power?" They had stared at each other, both breathing hard, the air between them crackling with tension. Then Caspian had started laughing, a deep, genuine sound that had startled her into silence. "What?" she had demanded. "You," he had said, still chuckling. "You are magnificent when you are angry, and you are absolutely right. I was taking the easy path instead of the right one. We will rewrite the policy, provide support for lone wolves instead of restricting them. Thank you for reminding me what leadership actually means. Her anger had deflated into surprise. You are agreeing with me? I am learning from you, he had corrected. There is a difference, and it is one of the many reasons I love you. The words had hung in the air between them, unplanned, spontaneous, utterly sincere. It was the first time he had said them directly, though she had felt his love through the bond for weeks. Her eyes had filled with tears, and she had crossed the room to him, letting him pull her into his arms. I am not ready to say it back yet, she had whispered against his chest. But I am close, so close. Take your time, he had murmured into her hair. I have already waited 7 years. I can wait a little longer. But he had not had to wait much longer at all. And every night, Caspian walked her to her door, wished her pleasant dreams, and left without asking for more than she was ready to give. These walks through quiet corridors became a ritual, a space where they could speak freely without the weight of witnesses or expectations. He told her about the pressure from his council to produce heirs, to secure the succession. She told him about her nightmares, the ones where she woke up back in her cabin, alone, with all of this having been a dream. He shared his grief for his father, the weight of a crown inherited too young. She shared her guilt for the family she had left behind, the mother who had died not knowing if her daughter was alive or dead. They learned each other slowly, carefully, building trust one conversation at a time. And with each passing day, the bond between them grew not just stronger, but deeper, rooted in genuine understanding rather than biological imperative. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. Arya could feel it like a living thing, a connection that thrummed beneath her skin, urging her closer, deeper, into a joining that was both biological and emotional. Her Omega instincts, long suppressed, began to awaken fully, responding to his alpha presence in ways that both frightened and thrilled her. But it was not just instinct. It was the way he listened when she spoke. Truly listened, valuing her opinions and ideas. It was the way he laughed at her dry observations, finding humor in her perspective. It was the way he touched her, always careful, always respectful, yet with an underlying reverence that made her feel cherished rather than possessed. There were small moments that built into something monumental, like the morning she woke to find fresh snow had fallen overnight, covering the castle grounds in pristine white. She had stood at her window, transfixed by the beauty, when a knock came at her door. Caspian stood there with a heavy cloak and boots, a boyish excitement in his eyes she had never seen before. Come with me, he had said, extending his hand, before the world wakes up, before footprints ruin the perfection. They had run through the snow like children, laughing breathlessly, their warm breath creating clouds in the frigid air. He had shown her a frozen pond where ice crystals formed patterns like lace, had pointed out animal tracks and named each creature. They had built a snow fort together, her architectural suggestions combining with his structural knowledge to create something absurdly elaborate for such a childish pursuit. At one point, she had bent to pack more snow, and he had kissed the back of her neck, right where his mark would eventually go. The gesture was so tender, so full of restrained longing, that she had turned in his arms and kissed him properly for the first time since arriving at the castle. It was different from the desperate kisses in her cabin during the storm. This was slow, exploratory, a promise rather than a claim. I am falling in love with you, she had whispered against his lips, the words escaping before she could stop them. His smile had been radiant. I know, he had replied. I feel it through the bond, every day a little more, and I thank the old gods for every moment of it. There were also moments of darkness that had to be navigated. One night, Arya woke from a nightmare so vivid she could not distinguish dream from reality. In her mind, she was back in her original pack, being dragged to the auction block, hands grabbing at her, voices bidding on her like she was livestock. She had woken screaming, her body drenched in sweat, panic clawing at her chest. Caspian had somehow sensed her distress through the bond. He appeared at her door within minutes, still half-dressed, concern etched into every line of his face. "Arya, can I come in?" He had called through the door, his voice urgent but controlled. She had managed to unlock the door, and he had found her curled on the floor, shaking, tears streaming down her face. Without a word, he had gathered her into his arms, had carried her to the bed, had simply held her while she sobbed out years of suppressed trauma. "They wanted to sell me," she had gasped between sobs. "Like I was nothing, worth nothing except what my body could provide. My own pack, the people who were supposed to protect me. They were going to sell me to the highest bidder, and I ran. I ran so far and for so long, and I am still running even though I am here, even though I am safe. I cannot stop running." "You are not running anymore," Caspian had said firmly, his arms tightening around her. "You are here. You are safe. And I swear on my life, on my crown, on everything I am, that no one will ever treat you that way again. You are not property. You are not a commodity. You are Arya, and you are mine only because you choose to be, not because anyone has the right to make that choice for you." He had stayed with her that night, both of them fully clothed, his presence the only thing that kept the nightmares at bay. In the morning, he had asked her about her original pack, had listened as she told him the full story for the first time, and then he had done something that made her love him even more. He had sent word to that pack, stripping them of their charter, disbanding them officially, and ensuring that the corrupt alpha who had tried to sell her was brought to justice. "You cannot erase the past," he had told her when she thanked him. "But you can ensure it does not harm others in the future. That pack will never hurt another Omega the way they hurt you." These layers of care, of understanding, of action that matched words, built a foundation of trust that went beyond the bond. Arya began to understand that love was not just a feeling, but a choice made repeatedly, in small ways and large, in moments of joy and in moments of pain. She also began to discover aspects of herself she had forgotten existed. One afternoon in the library, she found ancient texts written in languages she had picked up during her travels. She spent hours translating them, uncovering histories that had been lost to time. Caspian found her there as evening fell, surrounded by books and papers, her face alight with intellectual excitement. "What have you found?" he had asked, genuinely curious. "Treaties," she had said, her voice animated. "Between wolf packs and other supernatural beings from centuries ago. Alliances that worked, that created peace and prosperity. We could use these as models, reach out to the vampire covens and fae courts that have been isolated for generations. Imagine what we could build together." He had looked at her with such pride, such admiration, that she had blushed. "You are brilliant," he had said simply, "and you are going to change this kingdom in ways I never imagined possible." That project became her passion. She spent weeks researching, preparing proposals, reaching out through diplomatic channels that had been dormant for decades. And when she finally presented her findings to the council, even the most traditional members could not deny the potential benefits of her vision. Caspian watched her come alive in ways he had never expected, watched her transform from a frightened refugee into a confident leader, and fell more deeply in love with each passing day. This was not the submissive Omega of traditional expectations. This was a woman of intelligence, strength, and vision who happened to be an Omega, and she was reshaping what that designation meant for an entire generation. 2 months after her arrival, the first signs of her heat began. She woke one morning with a fever burning through her veins, with an ache that centered low in her belly and radiated outward. She had never experienced a full heat, having always suppressed them through sheer will and isolation. But here, with her mate so close, with the bond between them so strong, her body betrayed her defenses. She tried to hide it, tried to maintain normalcy through breakfast with Caspian and Lyra. But the Alpha King knew. Of course he knew. The scent of her heat filled the room, sweet and intoxicating, calling to every instinct he possessed. When Lyra left, he turned to Arya with eyes that had darkened to deep amber, his control visible in the tension of his body, the careful way he kept distance between them. "You are in heat," he said, his voice rough. "You should return to your rooms, lock the door. I will make sure no one disturbs you, that you have everything you need. It will pass in a few days." "And you?" Arya asked, her own voice unsteady. "What will you do?" "I will exercise extreme self-control and possibly punch several trees," he said with a strained attempt at humor. "But I will not come to you unless you ask me to. That choice is yours alone." She stood, her legs unsteady, heat making her dizzy. "What if I choose not to be alone? What if I choose you?" Caspian closed his eyes as if in pain. "Arya, you are not thinking clearly. The heat is influencing you. I will not take advantage of that, no matter how much I want to. I am thinking more clearly than I ever have," she said, moving closer to him. "For 2 months I have watched you, learned you, come to trust you. For 2 months I have felt this bond between us growing stronger. I am not asking you to claim me because of biology, Caspian. I am asking you because I choose you. Because I am ready to stop running, stop hiding, stop being afraid of what we could be together." He opened his eyes, and the naked need in them took her breath away. But there was something else there too, something deeper. Love. Not just desire, not just instinct, but genuine love that had grown through patience and understanding and respect. "Are you certain?" he asked, his hands clenching at his sides to keep from reaching for her. "Once this happens, once the bond is completed, there is no going back. You will be my Luna in truth, bound to me and I to you, for the rest of our lives." "I am certain," Arya said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "You will be my Alpha, and I will be your Luna." The control he had maintained for so long shattered. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, pulling her against him and claiming her mouth in a kiss that tasted of hunger and relief and promise. She melted into him, her body responding to his, with an intensity that confirmed what her heart already knew. This was right. This was real. This was home. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, carrying her from the dining hall through corridors that blurred around them. Servants scattered from their path, knowing instinctively what was happening, that their king was finally claiming his mate, that the kingdom would soon have its Luna. Her rooms became a sanctuary of a different kind. He laid her on the massive bed, with a gentleness that contradicted his size, his strength, the desperate need she could see in every line of his body. What followed was a claiming in the truest sense, a joining that was both physical and spiritual, that sealed the bond between them in pleasure and pain and overwhelming sensation. When his fangs pierced her neck, marking her as his, the bond snapped into place with such force that she cried out. Every emotion he had ever felt for her flooded through the connection. 7 years of longing, of searching, of hoping, of loving someone he had never met but had always known existed, and in return, he felt her fear transformed into trust, her isolation transformed into belonging, her careful defenses crumbling into vulnerability and strength combined. They were one, not in the way she had feared, not in a loss of self, but in an expansion of identity, 2 individuals choosing to become something greater together. The heat lasted 3 days. 3 days in which the outside world ceased to exist, in which they learned each other thoroughly, completely, without reservation or restraint. And when it finally broke, when she woke in his arms feeling clear-headed and sated and fundamentally changed, she knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. "Good morning, my Luna," Caspian murmured against her hair, his voice rough with sleep and satisfaction. "Good morning, my king," she replied, feeling the words settle into truth, into reality, into a title she no longer feared but embraced. The formal ceremony came a week later. The entire kingdom gathered to witness their Alpha King officially present his Luna, to see Arya crowned and acknowledged as their queen. She stood before thousands of people, wearing a gown of silver and white, a crown of moonstone resting on her black hair, and felt not fear, but pride. Caspian stood beside her, his hand wrapped around hers, his presence a constant source of strength. When he spoke the ancient words that bound them before witnesses, when she repeated them back with a voice that carried across the assembled crowd, something shifted in the very air. The kingdom had its Luna. The Alpha King had his mate. And Arya, who had spent so long running from destiny, had finally found where she belonged. The years that followed were not without challenge. Learning to rule beside Caspian required growth she had not anticipated. There were council meetings where she had to fight for her voice to be heard, territories to visit where traditional wolves questioned an Omega's right to authority, decisions that weighed heavily on her conscience. But through it all, Caspian stood with her, not before her or behind her, but beside her. He defended her when necessary, supported her always, and loved her with a constancy that never wavered. Lyra became not just a sister-in-law but a true friend, confidant, and occasional co-conspirator in keeping Caspian humble. The kingdom flourished under their joint rule. Arya's insights into the lives of common wolves, her years of surviving alone, gave her perspective that balanced Caspian's more traditional military upbringing. Together, they reformed laws that had been unjust, strengthened defenses that had been weak, and built a realm where even Omegas were valued for more than their biology. And then came the pups. The first time Arya felt life quickening in her womb, she wept. Not from fear or obligation, but from joy. From the realization that she was creating life with the man she loved, that her children would grow up knowing safety and choice and love in ways she never had. She gave birth on a winter morning, snow falling softly outside the windows, with Caspian holding her hand and refusing to leave despite the midwife's scandalized protests. The first pup emerged with a cry that filled the room, a healthy boy with his father's red hair and his mother's blue eyes. But there was another, and another. Arya delivered 5 pups that day, 5 healthy, perfect children, each one white as snow, a rare coloring that marked them as blessed by the old gods. 3 boys and 2 girls. Their tiny lungs strong as they announced their arrival to the world. Caspian looked at his mate and his children with tears streaming down his face. This powerful king reduced to overwhelmed wonder at the miracle before him. "You are extraordinary," he whispered to Arya. "You are everything." She smiled up at him, exhausted and euphoric. "We are everything," she corrected. Together. The white pups grew into strong, spirited children who ran through the castle halls bringing laughter and chaos. They had their mother's intelligence and their father's strength, and they were loved beyond measure. Arya taught them languages and strategy, while Caspian taught them combat and honor. Together, they taught them that power came with responsibility, that titles meant service, that love was the greatest strength of all. Sometimes, late at night, when the children were asleep and the kingdom was quiet, Arya and Caspian would stand together on the highest tower, looking out over the realm they had built together. He would wrap his arms around her from behind, and she would lean into his warmth. This connection between them as strong as it had been that first day in her cabin, perhaps stronger for having been tested and proven. "Do you ever regret it?" Caspian would ask, though he knew the answer. "Giving up your freedom? Your solitude?" And Arya would turn in his arms, would look up at this man who had searched for her across years and distance, who had respected her enough to let her choose, who had loved her enough to risk everything. "I never gave up my freedom," she would say. "I found it. True freedom is not being alone. It is being with someone who sees you completely and loves you anyway. You gave me that. You gave me everything." He would kiss her then, soft and deep, and the bond between them would pulse with warmth, with certainty, with love that had conquered fear and doubt and time itself. Years turned into decades. Their white pups grew into powerful wolves who took their places in the kingdom and beyond, carrying forward the legacy of a love that had transformed an entire realm. Caspian's red hair slowly threaded with silver, and lines formed around his amber eyes, marks of laughter and leadership. Arya's black hair remained lustrous, and her blue eyes still held the same depth they always had, though now they held wisdom earned through experience rather than isolation. They ruled together for 40 years, before Caspian decided it was time to pass the crown to their eldest son. At the ceremony where they stepped down, the entire kingdom gathered once more, this time not to witness a claiming, but to honor a partnership that had become legend. The Omega, who had hidden from destiny, the Alpha King who had never stopped searching. Together they had proven that true strength came from choice, that real power came from partnership, that the greatest magic was not in the bond itself but in choosing, every single day, to honor it. They retired to a small residence in the mountains, not far from where Arya's cabin had stood all those years ago. The old structure was long gone, reclaimed by nature, but they built a new one, larger and more comfortable. A place where they could watch sunsets over peaks they had both loved for different reasons. Their children visited often, bringing grandchildren who climbed over their grandparents with fearless affection. Lyra, now grown and mated herself, came with her own family, her exuberance undimmed by age. The castle sent regular reports, and they offered advice when asked, but their days of ruling were behind them. Instead, they filled their time with simpler pleasures. Caspian finally learned to play the violin properly, and Arya would sit by the fire listening to him practice. She taught him the constellations she had mapped in her years alone, and they would spend clear nights identifying stars together. They walked through forests hand in hand, hunted together in their wolf forms, and made love with the easy intimacy of those who knew each other completely. One particularly cold winter evening, as snow fell outside and fire crackled inside, they sat together in comfortable silence. Arya was reading while Caspian carved a small wooden bird, his large hands surprisingly deft at the delicate work. "Do you remember the first bird you carved?" he asked, not looking up from his work. "The one you brought with you from the old cabin." "I still have it," Arya said, setting down her book. "In the bedroom, on the table by the window. You told me once that it represented freedom you could not have. Do you feel free now?" She considered the question seriously, as she always did. "I feel something better than freedom. I feel chosen. Every day I wake beside you is a day I choose this life, this love, this us, that is worth more than any solitude, any isolation, any safety I thought I found alone." Caspian set down his carving and pulled her into his lap, something he had done countless times over the decades, something that still made her heart flutter as if it were the first time. "I would search for you again," he said, "through 7 years or 700, through every storm, every mountain, every barrier in existence. I would always find you. You are my mate, my Luna, my home, and you are mine," she replied, kissing him softly. "My Alpha, my king, my heart." Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the world in white, pure and clean and new. Inside, the fire burned warm, and 2 souls who had once been incomplete sat together in perfect wholeness, proof that sometimes the greatest journeys end not in destinations, but in the discovery that home was never a place, but a person, that love was not a prison, but a liberation, that choosing to trust someone with your heart was the bravest act of all. The white pups had been right to come into the world during a snowstorm, blessed by the old gods, marked as special. They grew up knowing that their parents' love was not ordinary, that it had conquered years of separation, that it had transformed a kingdom and redefined what it meant to be Alpha and Omega, king and queen, man and woman. And when Arya and Caspian's story was finally complete, when they passed together on the same night in their sleep, still wrapped in each other's arms, the entire kingdom mourned. But they also celebrated, because the love between the Alpha King and his hidden Omega had shown them all that destiny was not something to be feared or fought, but something to be embraced when it came in the right form, with the right person, at the right time. Their legacy lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the laws they had changed and the kingdom they had built. But more than that, it lived on in every Omega who no longer feared claiming, in every Alpha who learned that power with gentleness was stronger than strength alone, in every pair who chose each other freely and loved each other completely. In the end, it was a simple story. A woman who ran and a man who searched. Fear transformed into trust. Isolation transformed into connection. Two halves of a whole finding each other across time and distance and doubt, and choosing, every single day, to be together. "You will be my Luna," he had said. And she had answered, not with submission, but with strength. "And you will be my Alpha." Not because they had to be, but because they chose to be. Together. Always. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this beautiful love story. Let us know what you thought of this tale full of emotions and surprises. Tell us your name, where you're watching from, and rate this story from 0 to 10 if it touched your heart. And if you enjoyed the plot, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the amazing new stories coming soon. See you next time.